Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. As you can see, I will present about the topic that I am now currently researching about, which is the wild man. My research actually is about different wild man traditions in different parts of the world. But this topic in particular was, and this context in particular that I am researching about, is something that I have written for my first PhD paper. I'm going to now get into the topic and discuss it more in detail. So first of all, what is the wild man basically? The wild man is a character of folklore. It's a folkloric figure that is a human-shaped being, or sometimes even a fully human being. But it's usually covered in fur, lives in wilderness. He lives usually because it's usually a male being in isolation. It can have some unusual size, and there are some certain characteristics that you can spot and that you can find different wild men. Of course, like there are different traditions who refer to in which beings that you can define academically as wild men exists. But of course, there are many. It is being that is really widespread all over the world that you can find basically everywhere, which is quite interesting. Was quite interesting to me when I started researching about it. Since I realized it's good to ground this research in certain contexts, I decided to start from my home country, which is Italy, and the Italian Alps mostly, that is the context of my research. So basically consulted some sources also from Europe. Mostly, I tried to kind of focus more on what is the wild man in the Alps. I collected some pictures that you can see here, like for example, this wild man painting that you can see here is from Middle Ages, and it's probably one of the most well-known paintings of a wild man in Italy. Sorry, one of the most well-known figures of wild men in Italy. Mostly, if you are interested in this being touristically in the region where I took it, this is Lombardy region, so in the border with Switzerland. This is a very famous painting in some way, and also it's important to notice that the figure of wild man is a liminal figure, and it kind of it represents a link between what is the human domain, the human society, the definition, the category of human, and what is the non-anthropic environment, the so-called nature. I will come later to the of nature and what nature can mean specifically in this context. So basically, the important thing now can allow me to show what the wild man is and what the wild man represents in that context is to tell a kind of narrative that is that I could find there and collect also through secondary sources. This narrative is widespread in the Italian Alps and probably also in German-speaking parts of the Alps through the 20th century. Was collected like during the 20th century, mostly by local ethnographers. So it was written and collected in certain sources. And according to this narrative, though, of course, like as you might know, this narrative, which is a kind of legend, folk tale, you can label it with different genre terms. There are certain things that there are different variants, but the story is basically the same all the time. So a wild man kind of descends from the mountain, from the wilderness areas, and kind of gets in contact with some human villagers. These human villagers are still used to take milk from cows, but they are not able to make cheese. So the wild man comes in contact, comes in touch with these people, and teaches them how to make cheese. So there's this knowledge component that is very, very relevant also to this conference. And what happens, unfortunately, in this kind of narrative is that after the humans learn the technique, like some of them decide to trick the wild man. There are different variants of what is this trick exactly. Many cases, the trick that the wild man receives is, for example, a nail like under his buttocks while he sits on that, and he gets scared. I mean, at some point, the results that is important to highlight is that the outcome of this trick that is important to highlight here is that the wild man is offended, gets offended, abandons humans, and says, "No, I'm not teaching you any more techniques, even though I know them. I know some techniques like making, for example, beeswax from milk. So I won't teach you. It's something that you will not learn at all." And this is something that also is interesting to reflect about, and I will come to that also later. First of all, it's important to notice what does it mean to be a wild man in nature. What does it mean that the wild man exists in this natural context? And first of all, I would like to notice that the wild man is a merging figure between the cultural skills of humans and the natural environment of wilderness. So you have this idea of this being that, despite coming from the wild, despite coming from a sort of natural, so kind of not non-anthropic environment, he can still kind of foster the progress, the cultural progress of humans, mostly through this cheese making process. So, and also because the wild man is seen as usually seen as in that local folklore as a wiser figure than every other human, basically. So, and it's important to notice also that the wild man represents the way humans interpret and describe nature and wilderness in a certain context. So basically the context of the Alps. This is also a picture that I took in one of the closer environments. As you can see, like there are many, this is a kind of wild area too where I could hike, and it's a very interesting place. Very interesting place when you, very beautiful mostly, because you can actually realize how these areas are actually kind of unexplored, kind of distant, and are areas in which you can think some different beings can wander and can actually live in a different context, kind of detached from human societies. And there's always this aspect of detachment and attachment that is kind of dual, and is very interesting to notice when talking about the topic of wild men. So it's also interesting to notice then how this idea of nature and wilderness are represented and how they are portrayed basically in the local imaginary of the Alpine region. So first of all, I would like to notice the fact that the wild man embodies the image of wilderness, embodies in the sense that since the wild man is not most probably a real being, is more like a folkloric imaginary being, it is still something that in the imagination of people living in the Alps represents what is wilderness, what people think about wilderness. people kind of like refer to the body of the wild man and the individuality of the wild man, certain characteristics that that usually can be referred to more broad ideas and concepts such as wilderness or nature. So, for example, I think that the concepts that mostly come, I mean, these concepts of wilderness and nature, they mostly come from the analysis of wild men, are concepts that can be described as such in some way. Like, so the wilderness can be seen as the domain of the environment that is in some way detached from humans, not perceivable by them, but still not detached fully, I would also add, in the sense that you can't really, I mean, you still need to be in touch with wilderness. For example, like in contemporary times, if you want to do tourism in that area, it's very interesting, very important to be in contact with this dimension. Also for economical reasons, logging, for example, is still a quite exploited activity, as far as I remember, in that area, and which means that, of course, you need to be in touch with this wilderness and take something out of that. But on the other hand, you also need to respect wilderness. You need to kind of preserve it, because it's something, on the one hand, very important for the purpose of tourism in that area, and on the other hand, because of its intrinsic value. And the same I would say about nature, but nature is a wider concept in some way, sometimes even more problematic, because it can refer to different things, not just the wild environment that is detached from like usual human activities. It's a dimension that can encompass different aspects. And the most problematic thing that they have found, like while reflecting on this topic, is that nature usually, mostly in cultural studies, let's say, like the broader field of cultural studies, is something kind of counterposed to the idea of culture. So you have this dualism that that has been problematized time by time. But if you talk about nature nowadays in the academic context, and probably in some way in the context of Alps as well, even though not fully, it's still something detached from what humans do. And this is a problematic dualism that actually is kind of hard to embrace if you think that otherwise the wild man is like kind of shows that the relationship between nature and culture, and basically between like the nature and humans, is a fluid relationship. And it's a fluid relationship mostly because, you can thinking about mostly the tale about the wild man, knowledge, cultural knowledge, and culture in general comes from this contact with wilderness and with nature. So you can't really form a sharp distinction, a dichotomy, but rather a fluid and more nuanced relationship. Um, so knowledge, as I have pointed out, I can in some way come through this idea of nature. As I was also anticipating, a couple of minutes ago, like the one-man folklore kind of pre-exists the academic distinction between nature and culture. So, whereas in the whole tradition of academic studies, and like for a long time, mostly during the 20th century, mostly if you think about anthropologists like Claude Lévi-Strauss, for example, this duality between nature and culture is very present, and very much grounding the idea of studying. The studies of anthropology of culture, or of maybe in some way this thing has also kind of leaked through folk, towards folklore studies. So This is something that we must consider. It's an aspect that we must consider if we think about the fact that the wild man actually is something that comes from a different tradition, where you can see this fluidity with some like non-human and non-anthropic domain. So nature and culture are not separated things, and in a clear interaction with humans, and this is something that we cannot really undermine. And not only nature, as I said, but just also wilderness, as I anticipated. So basically, any kind of activity always takes into account a relationship with a wild environment that must be in touch with the environment of humans. So actually there is a kind of duality between this detachment and attachment, but a connection must be present and must be always there and must be not undermined. The one man, as I said, it's an embodiment of the image of wilderness and nature, but it's also a being that in some way shows symbolically how nature and wilderness are entangled to humans, like how nature and wilderness are in some way. I mean, if the wild man symbolizes and represents nature and wilderness, and if the wild man teaches skills to humans, like making cheese, basically this means that nature and wilderness are in some way sources of knowledge, not just sources of resources, but sources for knowledge for humans. Humans learn from the environment, that they are living within. They take material. Of course, they don't just take something material, but they learn, for example, how to deal with plants. They learn how to for example, how to breed cattle. They learn I'll tell you. Okay, I should contextualize what I said now. People usually, when they breed cattle, they during the summertime they bring them in some kind of higher altitudes to make them eat like some fresh grass and produce milk. Milk is as you have might noticed, milk and cheese are a very, very important aspect of the local economy. And the fact that people can use these materials, can actually have be in touch with this higher altitudes, where there are not cultivated camps, where cattle can actually eat and milk can be produced with certain standards, is an important aspect also for the local economy. So that's why, in some way, wilderness, nature are important aspect. There is a necessary entanglement for the local economy and for the subsistence of people who live there. So coming to the conclusions, I would like to restate that the one man is a fluid being, fosters the reciprocal connection and union between humans and nature rather than their distinction. The one man is very much representational of this link, since it embodies the way nature and wilderness offer skills and resources to humans. So they offer knowledge, basically. And humans acquire knowledge from the wild man, as well as they acquire knowledge from the environment that surrounds them. The environment, the wild environment, the natural environments, everything is there and makes sense for humans to acquire knowledge and to develop their subsistence. And there is also some, like a very last aspect that I would like to highlight. The fact that the folk narrative in some way kind of illustrates through the trick of the wild man the fact that the wild man has abandoned the environment where he lives in. The human environment, and returns to the wild environment where he was previously living in, as a cautionary tale for humans, just to make them notice how being detached from the wilderness, being detached from a certain natural environment can be detrimental to the subsistence of humans. They can stop some cultural progress. That can stop the possibility for humans to progress and to actually form to actually live in the way they could live and make their life easier and progress and have their proper subsistence. So it's very important in some way. The wild man to me is an important topic because it shows how it is important for humans to be in the environment and to make and continue making this continuous relation in order to achieve progress and also just to live and to exist in that specific environment. So thank you very much. These are the references that I have consulted, and yeah, if you have questions, you're welcome to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Terje.
Thank you, Michele. I enjoyed listening to this discussion about the problematization of nature-culture dichotomy and also this aspect of cautionary tales. But am I right that you told in the beginning that these folk narratives from the Alps are more German, from German-speaking people?
From the Italian-speaking people, and there are also some German-speaking people that, as far as I remember, but I'm not sure because I don't speak German, unfortunately. But as far as I remember, there are also German-speaking people who tell and retell this narrative as well.
You haven't made research if there are more German-speaking?
I think that it's probably more widespread in the Italian area. I'm sure there are some kind of, since this tale is very widespread in the whole Alpine arc, probably there are some areas like the Südtirol that is where there's a majority of German-speaking people who tell the same story, but I don't know too much about that because of lack of access to sources due to linguistic differences.
Thank you. I stand up, then I can see you better. Something that keeps me puzzled about this the wild man. It is in the image that you showed from the Middle Ages. Well, he has this club. He looks a little bit aggressive, but the wild man you are discussing, he's somehow so soft, so gentle. Like this. I wonder why doesn't he attack people, or does he kill babies or eat babies? If you compare it, for example, with the image of the witch, I'm sure that in the Alp region there were many witch trials. It's the region of the witch trials. And now the female witch, it is who is insider in the community, who is aggressive, who is dangerous. And this romantic wild man who is somehow representing the outside, but he's so soft like this. Is it maybe some kind of more recent image of him that where he has lost this dangerous masculine power?
There might be, actually. Okay, if you see this image that I have portrayed here, okay, this is, I took it because it's the most famous representation and kind of gives an idea of what a wild man is. And it can be a little intimidating, even though there are people also whom I met in the field that said, it's not, I mean, it is, I mean, the phrase there that is written in vulgar Italian, actually it was like the local dialect from that specific area. He says that I'm a wild man by nature and I will offend whoever scares me. It's a very, very strong statement. It's something that also can be seen as intimidatory, but also the expression these people that I met said, the expression is very seraphic, very serene. He's not really willing to threaten anybody unless you are really, really aggressive to him. So I think there's always this aspect of do not trick me, do not threaten me, like be gentle to me and I will give you something in return. So there is this kind of reciprocity, and probably there is some historical continuity about this idea of reciprocity. But the aspect of intimidation probably has also, I mean, it might be also possible that this aspect of intimidation can be lost now and in more recent times. And it was something more common maybe in Middle Ages. But it's really hard to reconstruct because, of course, like we should go through folklore in the Middle Ages, which is something that, because of some access to some sources, is pretty much impossible, or like very, very, very hard, at least. So I don't know if something is lost about that. And about witches, I saw also a connection. I saw a connection between the idea of, mostly the idea that witches there are seen as some kind of scary figures who wander in the wilderness and might damage you in some way. But I think there's still some kind of difference between, because with the wild man, this damage can come through some kind of misbehavior from humans. With witches, there is a malevolent intention and aspect coming from witches themselves. They go to the wild, to the humans, the villagers. So probably the common aspect is this, the common fact that they live in wilderness, they wander in wild areas, but like the intention, the kind of also moral aspect with this figure is different. In between these figures, there are different things morally speaking.
Okay, so we have, I think, one question.
I actually don't have a question. I have a quick remark that looking at his mild expression, he reminds me actually Jesus Christ, which is an interesting thing to take into consideration.
I think yes.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is like, I think one purpose of this research is to remind people nowadays of the harmonious relationship between human beings and nature once we had before, right? But one question is, do you think the wild man was more depicted or perceived by us as a creature or a human being? Because if it's a creature, then it belongs to the nature, it's very natural. But I think the point is like how we perceive it more as human being, and therefore we feel related, and there will follow the normative ambition of the research.
Okay, if I have to answer this, okay, in that context, the wild man is a kind of man who kind of lives in a different context. So it's not a specific being or creature that it doesn't belong to a different ontology, let's say. But yeah, of course, it has some different aspects, and that's what I kind of remarked. And it's not even like what I actually wanted to highlight is not even like forming a sort of harmony with nature, but more like the idea that this being fosters a connection that is also like kind of favorable to humans mostly, and who are like the same humans and villagers who have like created this kind of folklore and share this folklore about the wild man, and who apparently appears like being Jesus Christ, but it's it's interesting. I will think about that too. And yeah, so thank you very much.